Okay, I'm going to get started. I have a feeling I'm going to get a lot of people wanting some recordings of this. I'm not sure what happened with the link, but here we go. So I'm Louise Larson. I run August Consulting, guiding families on the road to college. And I can't believe my last webinar was only a couple of weeks ago, and I can't believe how much more there is to report since I recorded that. And I'm going to start with this thing that somebody sent me because it's sort of telling in the times that we're in. And it is from The Onion, and it says, wealthy father nervously waits for a response after sending donations to son's top college choices. And I'm just sharing that because these are the times we live in. So I'm going to start with some news and notes, and there's all sorts of new things that have taken place since I last did a webinar just a couple weeks ago. University of Denver has taken steps to add merit scholarships to their early decision applicants. They're doing this for a variety of reasons, but they want more people to apply early decision so that they can increase their yield and then increase their selectivity. So the more students that they can get to apply early decision, the more students they will have committed to them, and then they will become more selective, which a lot of schools are under pressure to become more selective. Last month, Town and Country magazine had an article entitled Duke, Baruch, or Bust. And the essence of that was that a lot of families are saying either, we're going to play for Duke or Yale, but we don't want to pay for those schools in the middle. If it comes to that, the really expensive schools in the middle, we would rather just have you go to a cheaper school. Interestingly, the New York Times had a piece about the the need for male applicants and male students, and they showed that, this is all on my Facebook page, Two River College Consulting. It's on my August Consulting Facebook page if you want to see these articles. But the New York Times said that at the University of Vermont this year, 2/3 of the sophomore class is girls, 1/3 boys. And at Tulane, the freshman class is 2/3 girls, 1/3 boys. So if you have a boy, at certain schools, they're really in demand. And 55% of high school graduate males are going to college. 70% of high school graduate females are going to college. So I was with a boy and his family the other day, and I was saying, you are a male applying to college, and colleges want what they don't have. And so finding males is harder than finding females for these colleges. On September 20th, there was news that West Point is being sued because they are allowing race-based admissions decisions. So when the SCOTUS decision came down this summer about race-based admissions in college and affirmative action, they actually agreed that the service academies could use race to make decisions. And so I'm telling you this because I think we will continue to have a lot of noise around the Supreme Court decision, around race-based admissions. And I'm sharing that to tell you that, what does that really mean? If you're sitting here listening to me talk, what does this mean for you? And the answer is not that much, really. What it means is that, and this was proven in Michigan and California when the UC schools stopped using race as a factor in admissions, those campuses became less diverse. So it probably means that your student might be going on to a less diverse campus. But what does it mean in terms of their specific personal admissions? Truthfully, not very much for you personally. I am in the middle of a book, and I'm going to share this it's called Never Enough. This is it. Never Enough. When achievement culture becomes toxic, and what we can do about it, by Jennifer Braheny Wallace. And the introduction was so alarming. It was so alarming as a teacher, as a parent, as somebody who's guiding students, that I actually called my oldest child, who's 2 years out of college, to hopefully confirm that I didn't contribute to this toxicity. And he was like, "Oh, we're all good. No, it's fine." And I said, "Do you remember?" And this was kind of one of my keystone moments where I said, "We are doing this right." I said, "Do you remember when we went to the University of New Hampshire and we both liked it so much? And we drove home and I said, you can probably get into the University of New Hampshire, so you don't have a thing to worry about." And in my mind, I had like unlocked the stress factor and just said, "We don't need to be stressed out." And I said, "Do you remember that?" And he said, "I have no memory of that." And I was like, "Okay, well, I tried." But I'm reading Never Enough, and I think that it's something to be mindful of as we are guiding our children through this, how much stress, how much pressure might be on them. There was in the Washington Post in the past couple of weeks an article about off-campus housing costs. And this is a really significant thing because the average college room and board is at the college, is, factored in about, say, $10,000, $15,000 with room and board. And as your child starts to look at colleges, you might take a long look at what their housing costs might look like if they go off campus, if it's expected they would go off campus. They showed Florida Atlantic University costs doubled from 2020 to 2022. So if you had a student at Florida Atlantic University in that timetable, the off-campus housing doubled. UC Santa Barbara has 25,000 students and 10,000 beds. So that school, you're going to have to plan to go off campus. And there's a tremendous amount of pushback in some of these communities around college housing off campus. People don't want college kids living next door to them. Some cities, or wherever the college is, city, town, getting off campus housing can be like a contact sport, and the school itself doesn't guarantee housing. So as you look with your students, it might be pragmatic to have an eye on what that might look like down the road if your child attends that campus. I talked in my last webinar about West Virginia University and how they had announced just some really drastic cuts, especially around the humanities and especially around world languages. And I read this article about it, and Gordon, there was a backlash. They had a no confidence vote in the president, but then they had some sort of vote, and the vote enabled them to cut all these programs. And this was so interesting to me because it said President Gordon G. learned 2 languages as a Mormon mission. And he said, quote, "This opened the world to me. And he wants the same for students." And he said this in 2019 when he was awarded the Senator Paul Simon Award for Comprehensive Internationalization. So here he's saying he learned 2 languages as a Mormon mission, and then he's cutting language programs at his school. And I think this is a little bit of something we're going to see more and more of, because since then, Miami of Ohio, which is a public Ivy, it's a beautiful campus, it's a really great place, put out a missive to their faculty saying, for under-enrolled programs, for programs that aren't heavily subscribed, you've got to go back to the drawing board. You've got to reinvent yourselves. You've got to create cross-curricular programs. Whoever put this edict out said, you got to come up with a plan or there will be cuts. Potsdam State, part of the SUNY system, announced cuts. So I think that colleges were in trouble before COVID. There was a lot of COVID money that allowed them to kind of keep things going. And I think we're going to see more and more schools, especially public schools, saying we have to make some cuts. I listened to a presentation from the UNC Chapel Hill admissions office. And, if you look at UNC Chapel Hill, you look at their admit rate and you're like, oh, okay, it's selective, but it's not crazy. But unless you're in North Carolina, they got 59,000 applications. 44,000 of those were from out of state applicants. 15,000 were from in-state. they accepted 40% of the in-state kids, but the out-of-state admit rate was below 10%. So if your child is applying to Chapel Hill, you've got to know, like, sift out the in-state, the out-of-state, and know what you are applying into. That's a really ultra selective school. I'm going to talk at length about the rankings in the FAFSA. Let me just get a few other little pieces of news out. Educational Testing Service that administers the SAT and the GRE is laying off 6% of their staff. I think that testing is taking a little bit of a hit in the test optional world. More of a litmus test. University of Wisconsin-Madison surpassed 50,000 students. They grew 1.6%. And since 2016, they've been trying to slow their growth, and actually they've been oversubscribed and have not been that successful. So what does that mean if you have a 10th and 11th grader? Wisconsin-Madison is going to be much more selective than it has been. If they're constantly trying to pull down their class and not being successful, they're going to probably admit less kids. Here's another interesting thing that I think is worth noting. When you start looking at colleges and you say, we want to go to a tour of this college on Saturday, and you look at their tours and their tours are booked, they say there's no more room. I heard an admissions person say, if just show up, because people book the tour and they can't get there on time. If you show up the day of the tour, at the 10 o'clock tour, and say, hi, we're here, they're probably going to let you on the tour. So I'm not saying that's a plan or a system to use, but if you find yourself shut out of a college tour at a time when you really thought you'd be there and you want to go on the tour, show up and just say, hey, we're here, and introduce yourselves, and they will probably try to accommodate you. All right. I want to talk about one more thing. Defining success in college admissions. I got a call from a friend of a friend, and this kid just had a lot of questions, and they're a senior, and they had one school in mind, and it's not the most selective school, but this kid was like, I've got to get into this school. Do you think I'll get into this school? What else could I do to get into this school? And seeing only one school as an option, and really kind of just latching onto one outcome that it truly defines success, that's a mistake, because I don't know if this kid's going to get into this school or not. But I would suggest that perhaps finding success could be something more quantifiable for you. You cannot determine if a school is going to let you in. Could it be, I know I put forth the best application I could. I gave my test prep the best shot it could. I really made sure I had a fulfilling, happy senior year. Putting success as something that you can quantify and measure that you did, not as an outcome, because college admissions is always about the college. It's never about the student. All right. The last thing I want to go into before I go into writing, and I was putting all this together and I was thinking, my gosh, there's so much to talk about. And then I'm going to talk about writing. Two things. The FAFSA. The FAFSA is the financial aid form, and the financial aid form was always available on October 1st, but this year they're redoing it, and they said initially December 1st. And in July, I said, I'm going to put my little wager, my non-existent wager, down on the fact that they don't get this out in December, and that maybe they have to roll this back a year. Well, here we are. It is October 9th, and now it's not December 1st. It's just December. Like, they're going to announce it at some point in December, the FAFSA opens. And I'm like, what family can tackle the FAFSA on like December 20th? I don't know. Don't get me started. But the thing I do want to show a little bit of information about this. My stuff about the FAFSA was somewhere. They are showing, hang on a second. Couple different things about the FAFSA. I do not have this. They the big change for families is that they're not going to allow more than one child in college in the calculation. So they used to give you a discount for a second child, and they're not going to do that anymore. The other big change is that family farms and small businesses, which didn't used to be part of the FAFSA equation, are now going to be part of that. So at some point, they're going to announce that they are going to do this. The CSS profile, which is a secondary measure, and if you have questions about this, just email me, will be available. It is available and it is open. And then the last thing I want to talk about is rankings. The US News and World Report redid their rankings. And what you have to understand about this is a product designed to sell magazines. So the US News and World Report rankings came out, and after 40 years, they changed some of their how they calculate this. They used to calculate 18% of the measurement was the school's wealth. 8% was small class size. That was eliminated. 20% of the US News and World Report ranking actually was polling other colleges. So they'd send the president of Macalester saying, asking them their opinion of, Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, and that would count for 20% of what different college presidents said about different schools. So what happened was there was a real shuffle in the rankings, and the schools that dropped just, outcries, like, and I don't want to pick on Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt sent out an 870-word email to 150,000 alums calling it deeply flawed because they went from 13th to 18th. And the chancellor, and this is all on my Facebook page, wrote just this long thing about how flawed this is, and says that the privileges of the large publics that take lots of Pell Grant students, it wasn't fair. And here's the thing about rankings, and it doesn't matter. And the Wall Street Journal's come out with a bunch of rankings, rank whatever you want. But, and this isn't my example. There's a podcast called Your College Bound Kid, which I would highly recommend. And he said, the best place, the most highly ranked place to live in the United States last year was Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I bet Green Bay, Wisconsin is a great place, but that's not my number one. And so what you have to do with these rankings is, I never consult them, but if you're going to consult rankings, look at them critically, and you can use them to say, my kid maybe really wants small liberal arts colleges. So what are the best highly ranked liberal arts colleges, to maybe get an idea of what you want to be looking at. But I just think that the outcry is sort of ridiculous. And Vanderbilt's still a great place. It was a great place when it was 13th. It was a great place now that it's 18th. It could be 25th next year. It could be second next year. Who knows? But rankings are there to sell magazines. They're not there to actually define in ordinal numbers which one is best. So it's a little bit of a flawed system. And if when you complain that much, you lose a little credibility. All right. So that is all the latest news in the past 3 weeks. The last little resource I want to share is, I took a quick look at this. I haven't done a full look at this, but on YouTube, Holy Cross College has put videos of live application reviews. And I haven't looked at them extensively, but I have seen live application reviews. And it's so interesting to see how they actually look at a kid and say, how's the rigor? What are the test scores? And decide to admit or not admit. So I would suggest taking a look at that if you're curious. And my last thing is actually a segue into the writing. And I worked with a student who, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, there's so much anxiety, there's uncertainty. People, you just don't know what's going to be right, how they're going to, if they're going to get in, and it's stressful. And this kid was no different. And I share his story because his essay is one that I use a lot as a model essay. And it, a lot of kids say to me, when I go to do my writing, my friend had cancer, they've got something really good to write about. And my it might seem like nothing's happened to you, and what are you going to share about? And this kid wrote an essay that I asked, could I use this to share with students that I'm working with? And the reason why is because when kids say to me, I have nothing to write about, I pull out his essay. And he was a star athlete in a sport. He was a team captain. He was this, he was that. And he kind of explained that, but then he jumped into, but his real love was basketball. And he just goes on and on about how much he loves basketball and how he was never good. And he was always on the bench, and he would get cut from teams. But sometimes he got to stay on the team because he was so good on the bench, getting everybody psyched because he just loved it so much. And if he did get in, he just played his heart out. And anyway, this whole thing about basketball. And it was so humble and so unassuming, and you could just feel it. And it's a great essay when kids say, I don't know what to write about. Like, well, here, this kid just wrote about something that he loves, and it really jumped off the page. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because I just saw he goes to a basketball powerhouse, and he is like the student reporter for the basketball team as a senior. And he's there with his microphone and his suit. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is so amazing. So it's hard in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade guiding them along. But like seeing him as a senior, as the student basketball, whatever he is, it just really made me happy. And it kind of is a natural segue into the writing, because his essay talked about how much he loved basketball. It's not a mistake that he's there. So if you have ever seen another webinar, I'm in a different seat of my office, a different place, because if you look behind me, one of the things I had framed for my walls is, it says, what's your story? I don't know if you can see it, but the thing about the writing is that's really what you're doing, is like, what's your story? And so for the uninitiated, here's what college writing looks like. A couple different things. There's the main essay. The main essay is what you put in the Common App, or if it's not a Common App school, they'll, in their application. So it's kind of like, the essay. And that has a cap of 650 words. There's supplemental essays, and I've seen supplemental essays as large as like 800 words. Usually they're more between 150 and 350. Occasionally they're short answer or like finish a sentence. Supplements are usually in the Common App. They sometimes pop up after you apply. Sometimes they pop up after you click a major. There are also writing for honors colleges and scholarships. Sometimes those are in the Common App. If you want to apply to the honors college, you've got to write something. Sometimes it can be by invitation for a scholarship or honors college. But the main writing is the piece in the Common App that's 650 words. And everybody calls it, my college essay, but actually the name of it is the personal statement. And when you shift that, it does change the dynamic a little bit from essay to personal statement. I always suggest that you, the student, and the parent might do it too, just to get a sense of what's what, is to read a couple essays. A lot of colleges have essay information on their college admissions website. Tufts does, MIT does, why certain essays worked and why. Because you will start to see these things are quick. Like they're a page, and you read them in a minute or two, and you start to say, okay, this is like, flying a short flight. Like the minute you get airborne, they're like, okay, prepare for landing. They're not long, and they're short. So a lot of kids come to this table thinking, I've got to write this dissertation and it's going to be this giant thing. And I'm like, it's really not that long. There's a couple of quotes that I've heard that I use, and I use to remind kids what we're trying to do. The essay confirms the application. Jeff Solingo, in his book, Who Gets In and Why, said he could see no one ever was like in the yes pile and got pulled because their essay was no good. So nobody ever got pulled out because the essay wasn't good. And nobody that was in the no pile ever got pulled into the yes pile because their personal statement was so strong. The essay confirms the application. Every piece of the Common App is valuable, and you should be using every piece of that Common App real estate to tell more about yourself. So if you're the captain of the hockey team and the all-state something or other and the MVP, that's in there already. So probably using the Common App to share something else other than they're going to see you're a high-level athlete. Using the writing to share a new facet that maybe wouldn't be anywhere else in your profile. A way to think about what you might want to write about is like, if you were putting your application in the mail, like, what's one more thing you'd want to tell them? Like, what's one thing that you'd want them to know about you that maybe your school counselor, your teachers, it isn't in there. So when you are guiding a child through this, it is so important. You do not want to dilute their voice. And some people might be like, my sister's an English teacher and my neighbor writes for the New York Times, and getting all these people involved, and just, too many cooks spoil the stew. You do not want to have professionals weighing in heavily on a teenager's writing. It's going to change it in a way. Colleges really want to hear their voice. And half the battle with these pieces is tone. You want these to have a good tone. And I'll talk a little bit about tone in a minute. It should sound like a student wrote it. It should not sound like a 40 or 50-year-old person wrote it, because if it does, they're going to think you wrote it. If your child turns in a piece that sounds like a professional journalist wrote it and nothing else in their profile points to that, it's not going to sound right. If your child is the head of the literary journal and writes for the newspaper and took AP Lang as a junior and AP Lit as a senior, and their English teacher is writing, saying this kid can write, like the Second Coming of Hemingway, and the essay is very formal and sounds like a professional journalist wrote it, it's because the kid's a great writer. But if nothing else in the profile reflects that, and it sounds like somebody wrote it that writes for the, the Economist, it's not going to work. It's going to be a mismatch. Another example of how the essay a good litmus test for an essay is if your essay was found in your school's hallway or in your neighborhood, would somebody be able to identify it as yours without your name on it? And I know that's not an exact science, but it's a good question to ask yourself. Tone is so important. Tone, you want to be likable, and you want them to be able, what colleges really want, kids that are going to come to their campus and get involved and thrive. And you want to have them imagine you being on their campus and showing what you do in your everyday life. And they can, extrapolate that and say, wow, if this kid's involved, this is what they're doing now, they'll probably be involved on a campus. Always better to write from humility. Humility, nobody expects you to have cured cancer or solved deep, world issues. You do not need to show off. You do not want to reiterate your resume. They've seen that. So writing from humility, not showing off is really good, a good step. AI. When these people read so much, And, some kids come across as serious, some kids are funny, some kids seem very sweet. When you submit a piece written by, artificial intelligence, it kind of shows there's a flatness to it. I wouldn't do it. There's no need. I mean, everybody's got a story, what's your story? Tell it. The one question that you might have is sensitive issues, controversial issues, disclosing things that maybe you don't want to disclose. If you made a really bad choice and didn't get caught, but learned from that, maybe that's not what you write about. It's okay to write from scars. You don't want to write from a wound. So that is just something to be mindful of. You don't want to be venting about something. That would kind of probably ruin the tone. So those are some tips and thoughts on the main essay, which is so broad that it can be a little bit intimidating to kids. When you go to the supplements are a little easier for a variety of reasons. The supplements are a little bit easier because they're shorter and they usually ask a more direct question. So the main personal statement is just so broad-based. What do you want to tell them? The supplements have much more direction and they're shorter. Typical ones might be, what's a meaningful extracurricular that you do and why? What do you think you want to study and why? Another big one is why us? A lot of schools ask, why us? And this is not, the mistake here is this is not a one-way love letter. Like, you're beautiful and I love Chicago and I felt so at home on your campus. This is not a one-way love letter. This should be why we're a match. And that requires going into the campus website, finding things like, when I saw that you have a campus in Venice, and I know, going into their website and finding real specifics about why you're a match, not why I love you. Why, it's more like, why do we belong together? Some schools have very short ones. Elon has one. What should we eat in your home? We're in your hometown. Where should we go and why? That's kind of simple. University of Maryland and Colgate have like finish a sentence ones. Think about your young child's art. And if your child was home drawing or painting at a very young age, you would just be like, oh my gosh, like, look at your drawing. It's so great. And the stakes are higher with college missions. I know that. But you wouldn't like tell your 4-year-old, like, that daffodil needs more yellow. Your yellow is too bright. We need, a different shade of yellow for that daffodil. You wouldn't do that. And it's the same way with your child's writing. You don't want to overly contaminate it. They say, like, the crime scene evidence was contaminated. You want to have their voice come through. And in that vein, two things. Sometimes people will say to me, oh, we did it in my English class. And I go, great. And look, some English teachers have a great sense of what this is. Some English teachers don't. And this is not like other writing that students do. This is a very unique, very personal piece. And so some English teachers have a great sense of this and some don't. So when your child says, oh, we're doing it in English class, that could be great. Or it could be like, oh my goodness. I've also had, this hasn't happened to me so much, but I've heard other people in my field say, this kid had just a stunning essay. And then they were asked to bring it into English class and the teacher ripped it apart and the kid left in tears. And it's like, so just, it's a tricky thing when the English teacher says, we want to be part of the writing process. That can be very good, or sometimes it doesn't work. The last thing I would say is, of course, your child is going to need help. Everybody needs help with their writing in the sense of somebody proofing it, bouncing ideas. Pick one person to help them. Don't have 4 different people weighing in on it. It's too much. And just remember, as you're doing that, I'll restate the quotes that I have. The essay confirms the application, and that it's one more thing you want to tell them about yourself, and that nobody ever got pulled out of a no pile or pulled out of a yes pile because of their application. So I am going to stop recording because that's that. And then I'm just going to see if there are